I came to kill his dreams of war. Our first meeting destroyed my own. Pine sap clung to the cold, and the rotors beat the sky into submission as the helicopter settled behind the barricades. Floodlights sliced the forest into shards of silver. Men and women in dark uniforms moved like a single organism, brisk, disciplined, almost silent. I adjusted the white band on my arm, medical, printed in bilingual caps, and followed the escort past the chain-link fence into the enemy's heart. I was 31, an Omega, and a liar by training. My cover was airtight, a field physician who spoke 3 regional dialects, recruited through a neutral aid organization, and loaned to the frontier to reduce casualties. I had forged certificates, a tidy history, and a precise smile for checkpoints. I also had a mission: walk this camp, find the skeleton of the offensive, and snap the spine before it could stand. The air tasted like metal and resin as they led me to the briefing hangar. My pulse was steady. My mind was a neat grid of tasks. Note the distribution of fuel tanks, count the inbound cargo crates, map the living quarters to infer command patterns, triangulate comms from the tower's blinking arteries. Then the heavy doors slid open, and the world changed shape. He stood at the far table, over a spread of maps so broad they could have doubled as sails. Tall, spare shoulders squared like a rule drawn across the page. Close-cropped black hair. Eyes the sort of iron gray that promises storms and then keeps its word. Even still, he felt like motion. A contained force you only notice by how everything else behaves around it. General Volk, my escort announced. I knew the name already. Adrian Volk, architect of 3 victories, rumored to favor surgical strikes and treaties signed before the ink of blood could dry. The dossier had photos that flattened him into pixels. Reality carried gravity. He looked up at me, and the distance between us collapsed to a point I could not step around. My breath hitched, quiet enough to hide from humans, not from myself. A clean, electric recognition lit my nerves. My heartbeat stumbled, then found a different tempo, as if it had been looking for this rhythm and finally heard the drummer. No, I thought. No, not here. Imprint. The word rose like a flare, bright and unwelcome. My training snapped into place, lock the scent, slow the breath, fold the reaction into a diaphragm of cold steel. I kept my face neutral and my shoulders easy. Inside, my body leaned forward of its own accord, like a plant turning to a window. Dr. Mason, my escort said. Interpreter. General, I added, my voice even, my mouth dry. Thank you for permitting outside humanitarian support. He considered me. Not a flicker, not a twitch. Just that silent weather behind his eyes assessing wind direction. Our medwing is understaffed. Your organization has a record we respect. A beat. Welcome. If he felt anything, he hid it with a discipline that made my skin heat and my irritation sharpen. I hated that I noticed the width of his hands, the clean ink of the topo lines beneath his fingers, the faint cedar thread in the air that might have been his cologne or the room's wood oil. I hated that I wanted another breath. The hangar door groaned. A man in a grease-stained jacket breezed in with a laptop tucked under one arm and 2 steaming mugs hooked in the other. Beta, by scent and by the quick, unthreatening grin he handed everyone like a business card. Coffee delivery for the war poets, he announced, then spotted me. Ah. New face with murder eyes. He thrust a mug toward me. Liam, I make drones do morally complicated things. Dr. Mason, I said, taking the cup because refusing draws more attention than not. The heat bit my palm, an anchor. I prefer saving lives to morally complicated things. Same, he said cheerfully. But machines don't bleed, so here we are. Liam, Volk's voice was not sharp, but the sound of it reset the room to order. The supplement to the topographic grid? Here. Liam popped his laptop open, keys rattling like wind through metal. Satellite passed from 2 hours ago, corrected for haze. I stitched the elevations. It's pretty. You'll hate it, project it. Lights dimmed. A wash of green and gray ghosted across the far wall. I kept my gaze on the map, not the man, cataloging ridgelines, supply roads, those pale bullet worm tracks of newly cut trails. My body, treacherous thing, tracked him anyway. The slight shift of weight when he leaned in, the measured way he crossed the floor, the silence he carried like a blade in its sheath. "Dr. Mason," he said, and my name in his mouth made my spine lengthen. "You speak the northern dialect?" "Yes, General. We've had issues with the settlement clinics. Miscommunication." His gaze skimmed mine. "Brief, cool, too precise. I'd like you to accompany our med teams. Assess. Recommend. Useful access." I arranged my face into professional concern. "Of course." He nodded to my escort. "Quarter her by the South Infirmary. Dismissed." "Control the edges," I told myself as we stepped back into the cold. The floodlights had shifted, halos relocating as if the camp had exhaled. From here the base unfolded. Barracks like book spines, long and orderly, mess halls breathing steam, the tower blinking its slow mechanical eyelid. Somewhere in the grid people were laughing softly, swearing softly, sleeping like only the tired can. The scent of fuel slid under the sharpness of pine. In the infirmary I met the staff. A knot of overworked nurses, a pair of exhausted interns, a quartermaster who knew exactly how many sutures we had left and that the number was a joke. I smiled the right amount, rolled up my sleeves and stitched a split brow whose owner called me Angel in a dialect I pretended to need repeating from my own notes. My hands were steady. They always are when everything else isn't. Behind my sternum the thrum continued, quiet and relentless. I showered faster than comfort and pulled on a clean shirt from my single bag. The mirror over the sink was scratched. My face looked like it had been drawn in pencil and someone's eraser had smudged the edges. 31. A lifetime of control. A body that had learned to tuck the omega biology into a locked drawer and sit on the key. In the corner of my room, a narrow cot, a locker, a metal chair pretending to be comfortable, I spread my notebook and began mapping the base from memory. Fuel, food, munitions, med, command. From the hangar, redundancies in the east corridor. From the tower, a blind arc where the camera blinked too slowly. From the infirmary, a schedule gap around shift change I could drive a truck through if I had one. My hand paused. I wrote, Volk, Adrian, then stopped, annoyed at myself. I drew a box around his name as if I could quarantine it that way. A soft knock. I slid the notebook under my pillow and opened the door. Liam leaned in the frame, holding a battered tablet and wearing the same unkillable grin. "I'm doing a supply audit and pretending it's a side quest. If I don't collect 10 med posts by midnight, the universe resets. Walk with me? Is that how this place motivates engineers?" That and coffee. Mostly coffee. We walked the southern edge of the camp, his tablet throwing a dim rectangle on his face. He pointed, I memorized. He joked. I let a smile loose in the dark. He watched my eyes trace the fence lines and huffed a small noise. "You know, you look like someone who reads the ending before starting the book. Saves time. Or ruins surprises." "I prefer my surprises dead," I said. It came out a little too sharp, so I softened it. "Long day." He glanced sideways. "Beta eyes are good at reading rooms. He's not what you expected." "Who?" he snorted. "You're a terrible liar." I said nothing. The night answered for me. Distant boot scuff, pine needles whispering, generator hum. Somewhere a coyote yipped, a thin sound that made the floodlights feel thinner. "Relax," Liam went on. "He's not a throat ripper. He searched for a word and failed, which told me as much as if he'd found one. He's trying to keep this machine from eating us. It's not a popular hobby." We looped back toward the infirmary. "Good night, doctor," he said. "Welcome to the most organized mess you'll ever see." "Good night, Liam." Inside my room, the quiet thickened. I lay on the cot and listened to the camp's pulse through the metal frame, footsteps, laughter, a cough, a door. I breathed through my nose, pine, antiseptic, cold cotton. Beneath it, faint as memory and as impossible to ignore, a scent that keyed to something low in me and turned it. Imprint, my mind insisted. "No," I told it again. "I am not a bond, I am not a leash, I am a blade." But when I closed my eyes, what rose to meet me was not a map or a timetable. It was gray eyes over a sweep of impossible maps, calm voice, steady hands, a man who didn't flinch at war because he was busy strangling it before it learned to breathe. My mission had been simple this morning: infiltrate, extract, extinguish. Now the edges were leaking. I hated that I wanted to see him again. I hated that my body had betrayed me with the efficiency of a perfect lie. Worst of all, I hated that somewhere beneath the hate a new truth had started, soft and stubborn. I wanted the enemy. Morning came wrapped in engine hum and the distant bark of orders cutting through cold air. I walked the camp with a clipboard in one hand, and my forged credentials in the other, moving like I belonged because people rarely questioned the confident. The white armband helped. So did the way soldiers avoided eye contact when they were tired enough. My job, or the one they thought was my job, was to check medical readiness along the perimeter clinics. My real job was to read the bones of this place, the pulse lines of fuel routes, the choke points in supply, the gaps in patrol schedules. Every step built a map in my head. Here, a blind corner between the barracks and the south fence. There, the stretch of road where spotlights flickered every 20 seconds instead of 10. I tucked each observation into the quiet drawer of my mind, like cards in a deck I intended to play later. And always, somewhere on the edge of my vision, Adrian Volk. He didn't follow. That would have been too obvious. But he appeared where my path crossed command checkpoints, where soldiers stiffened and clipped their salutes. He spoke little, if at all, simply standing with that unreadable calm, eyes like gunmetal under frost. Not hostile, not warm, just watching. And it was worse than being threatened, because at least threats come with instructions: run, fight, lie. A man who only looks gives you nothing to push against. By the third checkpoint, my nerves buzzed like power lines. "Dr. Mason," one of the guards said, scanning my forged pass a little too long. His frown lasted half a second more than comfort allowed. I offered the practiced smile of neutral professionals everywhere. "Medical supplies," I said. "Tetanus doesn't wait for bureaucracy." He didn't move. Another guard stepped closer. And then, "Problem?" Adrian's voice cut across the road like a low blade. The guards straightened so fast I almost heard bones creak. "No, General. Routine check. She's cleared," he said. Not loud, not soft, just final. They waved me through. I walked on, heart drumming hard enough to feel in my teeth. Why had he intervened? Why risk his name on my clearance? I didn't look back. I could feel him there anyway, a weight at my shoulder until the next turn swallowed me from view. "Relax," a voice drawled in my earpiece. I bit back a sigh. "Mark, yours truly." My partner's tone carried a grin I didn't want to see. "Either you're blushing or someone's got a rifle sight on you. Should I be jealous?" "Of the rifle?" "Please," he chuckled, static fuzzing the edges. "Careful, Mason. These alpha types collect pretty things. Might mount you on the wall next to their medals." "Thanks for the poetry," I muttered, scanning the cluster of storage sheds ahead. 2 guards, both bored enough to lean on their rifles. A third smoking behind the generator shack. Schedules shifted here, boredom did that to people. "Poetry's free," Mark said. "Getting you out if you blow your cover, that'll cost extra." I shut him off with a double tap on the earpiece. The storage sheds gave me my first real prize. A clipboard left on a crate held inventory logs, neat columns of dates and supplies, ammunition, rations, fuel drums. Better, attached maps marking delivery routes and warehouse capacities. I flipped through casually, like a doctor checking bandage stock instead of counting artillery shells with my eyes. Footsteps approached. I snapped the board shut just as someone rounded the corner. Not Adrian. A lieutenant eyed me with the flat suspicion of men told to expect spies and given no description of them. "This area's restricted." "I'm assessing medical storage," I said, crisp, annoyed, the way real doctors get when logistics delay treatment. "Unless your soldiers don't need field dressings?" His gaze sharpened. "Orders?" I reached for my pass. "Lieutenant, Adrian again." He stood at the end of the row, shadow cut long by the noon sun. The officer snapped straight. "Sir, I was just..." "She's attached to Med Command." A pause, deliberate. "By my authorization," that landed like a stamp on wet clay. The man backed off, muttering something about protocols. I didn't thank Adrian, couldn't. My throat felt locked, my body aware of him in a way I hated. The space he filled, the steadiness he carried like armor you wanted to touch just to see if it would dent. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just moved on, coat dark against the wind, as if he hadn't just handed me the key to keep digging. Liam found me later near the comms tower, grinning around a mug of coffee big enough to drown in. "Busy day for our new medic," he said, offering the cup. I took it because refusing kindness draws questions. Apparently. He nodded toward the fading silhouette of the general across the yard. "Careful with that one. Man falls faster than my drones when the batteries die." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Alpha eyes," he said solemnly. "Dead giveaway. Next thing you know, he'll be writing you poetry about artillery placements." I snorted into the coffee, which tasted like burnt earth and adrenaline. By dusk, the map copy lay folded in my sleeve, smudged with fake medical notes on top, real troop logistics beneath. First piece of the puzzle. I walked back toward the infirmary under bruised clouds, the wind sharp with pine and diesel, and told myself the day had gone well. But every step carried the memory of gray eyes watching too closely, clearing my path like he wanted me here. And that made no sense at all. Adrian Volk asked for me personally. The request came through the infirmary's young runner, a kid whose boots looked too big for his legs. "General wants you at the hangar," he said, eyes wide like this was either a summons or a death sentence. "Why?" I asked, sliding scalpels back into their tray. He said, "Translation duty?" "Translation, right." I stripped off my gloves, washed my hands, and told myself this was good. Access was good. Proximity was risk, but risk often paid better than caution. The hangar was warmer than last time. Diesel heaters thrumming along the walls, maps covering 2 long tables, the air alive with tension. Engineers clustered near the projectors, voices low, papers shuffled. Adrian stood at the center like the calm eye of the storm, coat unbuttoned, expression unreadable. "Dr. Mason," he said as I approached. "Not warm, not cold, just precise. Some of our consultants prefer the northern dialect. I need you to interpret." I nodded, keeping my face smooth, my pulse steady. Of course, what I didn't expect were his questions. They came between translated discussions about bridge weights and fuel efficiency, slipped into the cracks like rain through a roof. Where had I studied medicine? How many languages? Did I find the winter here harsh compared to the lowlands? Nothing overt, nothing you could circle in red and accuse him of. Just gathering threads, weaving them quiet as he wrote notes in the margins of his maps. I lied smoothly. Years of practice made it sound like conversation instead of alibi. But he watched with that steady gray calm, and I hated that my skin prickled like he could feel the falsehoods, even if he didn't call them out. The meeting broke for 10 minutes when someone brought in a tray of bitter camp coffee and rolls that looked like they'd been baked during the last century. I stepped aside, grateful for the pause. Liam found me leaning against a support beam, arms crossed. He handed me a mug that smelled faintly of burnt chicory. "Fun fact," he said, sipping his own. "The general doesn't trust half the people in that room." "Odd way to run a command," I said lightly. "Smart way," he corrected. "Councils leak. Advisors have agendas. Even lieutenants trip over their own ambitions sometimes. Volk keeps things tight." I glanced across the hangar. Adrian was bent over the table again, head inclined toward a logistics officer pointing at some supply figures. Calm, intent, the lines of his shoulders relaxed but ready, like he could snap into motion faster than thought. Liam followed my gaze, grinned. "Man carries the whole front on 2 hours sleep and stubbornness. I've seen him eat once this week. I think bread fears him." "Does he trust you?" I asked. Liam saluted lazily with the mug. "I fly his drones and fix his comms. If I betrayed him, the whole sky would fall. So, probably..." The break ended. Back to work. I translated notes about fuel convoys, river crossings, bridge capacities. Adrian wrote quickly, sharp black lines across pale maps, the tendons in his hands moving like cables under skin. I hated that I noticed. "Focus, Mason. but my treacherous eyes kept slipping back when he leaned over the table, when he pushed a marker across the paper, when he erased something with the edge of his palm. A man writing war like music, like something precise and inevitable. At one point he looked up mid-sentence, catching me watching. Our eyes met for half a breath too long. My face didn't change, neither did his. But my pulse tripped over itself like a rookie on parade. After the meeting, as people filtered out, I almost escaped before the next interruption. "Dr. Mason!" The voice carried the faint drawl of someone both amused and annoyed. I turned to see a tall man in a medical coat too white for this camp's mud. He strode over with the air of someone about to fix things no one asked him to fix. "Dr. Rains," he introduced himself. "Chief Medical Officer. You're the volunteer?" "Translator," I corrected. "Translator with surgical clearance," he said, flipping through a clipboard. "Your triage protocols are unorthodox." I raised a brow. "They save lives. They break chain of command," he countered. I smiled thinly. "Command tends to dislike bleeding out, in my experience." His mouth tightened. "In this army, order saves more than speed. In this world," I said, voice cool, "arteries don't wait for paperwork." A few engineers nearby smothered grins. Rains muttered something about volunteers with attitudes and stalked off, coat flaring like an offended seagull. By evening, the camp settled under a bruised sky, lights flickering on in rows like tired eyes opening. I made my way back toward the infirmary, the cold sharp enough to taste. Mark's voice crackled in my earpiece before I even reached the door. "So, how was your romantic day translating for tall, dark, and terrifying?" I rolled my eyes even though he couldn't see it. It was a meeting, not a romance novel. "You sure? Because my sources, meaning Liam, obviously, say you were making serious hard eyes at the General's hands." I stopped on the steps, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I was watching him write troop movements, Mark." Static buzzed like a held-in laugh. "Classic spy mistake. First it's troop movements. Next thing you know, you're doodling little hearts around his name in your notebook." "Good night, Mark," I said flatly. He chuckled, the sound fading as I yanked the earpiece out. Inside my narrow room, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and let the silence settle. I had maps now, schedules, pieces of the machine I'd come to break. So why did my mind keep replaying the line of his shoulders over the table, the way his voice wrapped around questions like smoke? I told myself it was strategy, observation, enemy assessment, but the word that came back, unwanted and relentless, was imprint. The camp slept like soldiers do, lightly, weapons within reach. Floodlights spun slow arcs over the fences, carving shadows between barracks and supply sheds. I moved through them like water through a sieve, dressed in black, pass forged twice over, heartbeat tucked tight against my ribs. Tonight was the night. Days of observation had mapped the camp in my head, patrol routes, guard rotations, the gap in cameras near the east wall where frost shorted the wiring every few hours. Past that gap, the headquarters building rose in pale concrete slabs, the nerve center of this whole machine. Inside were the plans for the next offensive. Coordinates, troop movements, fuel chains, rip those out, and the war bleeds before it can even march. I slipped through a side door when a pair of officers left, laughing about poker losses. The corridor smelled of paper, dust, and machine oil. My boots made no sound on the concrete floor. Third door on the right, command archives. I worked the lock with fingers steady from training, not nerves. The door gave after a single metallic sigh. Inside, rows of file cabinets and 2 glowing terminals, the hum of servers like a hive. I pulled a flash drive from my sleeve, slid it into the nearest port, and began copying. Digital files first, then the paper maps if time allowed. Every second stretched. A plan for the southern advance, a list of supply depots, schedules for the air units. Each folder weighed more than gold because soldiers' lives were stacked between these lines. I almost didn't hear him over the hum. "Busy night, Dr. Mason?" The voice came from the door. Low, calm. I froze. Adrian Volk leaned against the frame like he'd been waiting there an hour, coat unbuttoned, the faint glow from the screen drawing steel across his cheekbones. He knew. Of course he knew. I straightened slowly, hand still on the flash drive. Calculations raced through my head, distance to the window, his stance, my knife inside the boot. My pulse thudded like fists on a locked door. He didn't move, didn't call guards, didn't even reach for the sidearm at his hip. "You can kill me," he said finally, voice even as the hum of the servers. "But first let me kiss you properly." I stared at him. The words hit harder than any accusation would have. What? His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Isn't that how these stories go? Seduce the enemy? Steal the plans? Except you've been looking at me like you weren't sure which came first." I gripped the edge of the desk to ground myself. "You're insane. Probably." His eyes flicked to the flash drive, then back to me. "Take it. Go." The hum filled the silence between us. "Why?" I demanded. Adrian shrugged, slow, deliberate. "Because you're here to stop a war I'm tired of fighting. Because maybe I want to see what you do with that." His gaze softened just enough to unsettle me further. "Because I trust you more than the men who claim to serve me." My throat closed around words that didn't know where to land. I pulled the drive free, slid it into my sleeve. My hand brushed his when I moved toward the door, and he didn't step back. His fingers closed around mine briefly, warm, steady, absurdly gentle for someone who commanded artillery strikes before breakfast. Then he let go. "Run, Dr. Mason," he said quietly. Before I changed my mind, I ran, not fast enough to look untrained, not slow enough to look guilty, just another shadow melting into the perimeter before the alarms could catch a reason to wake. Dawn dragged itself over the tree line, pale and cold. I sat on my bunk, flash drive hidden in the lining of my jacket, head still full of his voice. "You can kill me, but first—" "No. Focus. Plans first. Extraction next. Then maybe I could figure out why my pulse hadn't slowed since last night." The camp stirred. Boots on gravel. Engines coughing awake. Liam appeared in the infirmary doorway mid-morning, tablet under one arm, grin loaded like a spring. "You hear the general this morning?" he asked. I forced my shoulders loose. "No, exactly," Liam said, eyes bright with mischief. "Man's quieter than usual, like someone stole not just his plans but maybe his heart. Should we be worried, or planning the wedding?" I glared at him over the rim of my coffee mug. "Don't you have drones to calibrate?" He smirked, already backing out the door. "Sure, but if you start wearing his coat around camp, I'm telling everyone." I exhaled slowly when he left, the taste of adrenaline still metallic on my tongue. The flash drive burned against my side like a live coal, and behind my eyes, gray gaze, steady voice, the ghost of his hand closing over mine when he should have called the guards. The camp braced for tomorrow like a body holding its breath. Fuel trucks coughed along the gravel. Pallets were cinched tighter with ratchet straps, and the comms tower blinked a slow, relentless red as if counting down a heartbeat we couldn't afford to miss. Somewhere out in the dark, artillery crews checked elevation by feel. In the infirmary, we packed trauma kits the way priests set a table for sacrament. I told myself I was fine. I'd slept an hour. I'd eaten half a protein bar. My hands didn't shake stitching a torn knuckle for a boy so young his cheek still believed in freckles. When I stepped outside, they shook. The cold found the thin places and moved in. Diesel stung my nose. Pine resin clung to the wind. The floodlights made hard islands of brightness on the tarmac. Beyond them, the world turned into a suggestion of trees and ice. I stood by the shadowed side of the hangar and pressed my palms to the corrugated metal until the sting in my skin outshouted the noise in my head. Flash drive secured. Extraction window narrowed. Offensive at dawn if we failed. "Doctor." His voice slid into the night quiet as a blade returning to its sheath. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. The imprint hummed in my bones before my mind caught up. "General." Steps approached, not many, not hurried. Adrian stopped 2 arms' lengths away, just far enough for choice to be a real thing. "You're trembling." "I'm cold," I said. "You're exhausted." It wasn't accusation, it was inventory. "So are you." A pause. "That's true." We stood with the hangar wall at my back and the open strip to my right, breath drawing small clouds that didn't last. When I finally looked at him, the floodlights caught in his eyes and turned them into a weather I wanted to stand in. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I agreed, and the word tasted like metal. I swallowed. "Why did you let me walk out last night? Because if I stopped you, I'd be playing a game I intend to end." His gaze held mine steady. "Because you're here to stop a war I'm tired of pretending is useful. Because—" He didn't finish. Maybe the rest lived in the air between us, easy to read if you'd learned the alphabet of silence. The wind knifed under my jacket. Adrian shrugged out of his coat as if it were a reflex and draped it over my shoulders before I could protest. Heat lived in the lining, his and the hangers, and it hit me like a small mercy I hadn't asked for. "You don't have to. It's a coat, Mason." He almost smiled. "It's not a treaty." I huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if my throat hadn't been tight. "You and your semantics, me and my survival techniques." He was close enough now that if I reached, my fingers would find the clean line of his jaw. I didn't. I knew better than to feed the thing inside me that had woken the first time he looked up from a map and turned my ribs into a tuning fork. "Say the word," he said quietly. "Walk away. I won't touch you." My fingers tightened on the coat lapels like they were a rope over water. I listened for my training and found, to my surprise, something softer answering first. His breath eased out in a visible curl. "Then I'll meet you there." He didn't move. He didn't reach. It was the gentlest threat I'd ever been given, be wanted without being taken. My body, treacherous, honest thing, stepped the last small distance before my thoughts could argue, and the imprint sang so clean it hurt. When I touched him, just a hand, just my palm against the rough wool at his chest, the quiet in me widened like a door. "Careful," he murmured. "I'm done being careful," I said, and my voice shook for exactly one syllable. The first kiss wasn't cinematic. No swelling music, no flags snapping in heroic wind. His mouth was warm and certain, the kind of certainty you lean into when the ground under you has been moving for too long. He tasted like coffee gone cold and a day survived by force of will. When I broke it, it was only to remember air existed. He searched my face like he was cataloging a map differently than he had ever drawn one. "Still your choice?" "Yes, we moved because the cold demanded it." The hangar door sighed us into a dim corner by a stack of tarps and a folded field table. Someone had left a space heater buzzing low. It hummed like a cat that liked us despite itself. He didn't crowd. He didn't frame me with arms against the wall or turn tenderness into an order. He let me decide distance, and I decided it 3 inches closer, chin tilted to test the way his breath felt on my skin. He touched me like someone handling a live wire. Steady hands, sober attention, respect for the spark. My trembling took its time leaving. When it did, it left exhaustion like a tide mark. Adrian sat with his back to a crate and drew me down beside him, still in his coat, my shoulder tucked under his. The heater ticked. Somewhere a forklift coughed and fell silent. "Tell me something true," I said, because lies had been my diet and I needed one clean taste. "I don't sleep much. A beat, and when I do I dream of empty chairs in the mess hall." I let that live in my chest with the other things I'd been refusing, the way he wrapped his words in understatement as if kindness were contraband, the quiet grief he wore like a second uniform. "Tell me something else," I said. He considered. "I knew the second week you were lying about something. I didn't know which part, and you—" "What? Waited to see if I'd stab you?" "I made room for the possibility of mercy," he said. It seemed more strategic than certainty. I laughed before I could stop it, head falling lightly against his shoulder. "Only you could make trusting someone sound like a logistics decision." "It is," he said. "It's the most expensive one I make." I turned to look at him. "And tonight isn't expensive," he said. "It's priceless, which is worse." I kissed him again because words were beginning to stack in my throat and I'd rather drown than speak them wrong. He answered with the same restrained heat, the kind that lives longer than fire because it remembers to breathe. His hand slid, careful, to the back of my neck. and I felt my whole spine lengthen like a string pulled true. Somewhere in the pocket I'd forgotten to empty, my earpiece buzzed. I swore softly and fumbled it out. Mark's voice crackled at a volume that could wake the dead. Well, look at you maintaining peak operational standards. Yes, professionalism at its finest. I closed my eyes. Mark, if you value your teeth. Relax, Romeo and Juliet. I'm monitoring vitals and grid chatter. The sky isn't falling, yet. He paused, and I could hear a smile in it. Just, don't forget the extraction window, yeah? I won't, I said, and thumbed the channel to mute without waiting for his parting shot. Adrian's brow had lifted a fraction. Your colleague? My bad conscience, I said. On loan from command. Does he always provide color commentary? Only when he's being insufferable, which is to say, yes. The earpiece sat heavy in my palm for a second before I set it on the crate. The heater hummed, and for a moment we inhabited a kind of fragile ordinary I hadn't believed possible, in a room that smelled like oil and maps. I should be afraid, I said into his shoulder, voice low. Of you, of tomorrow, of what I want. You are, he said, not unkindly, and you're here anyway. There are 1,000 ways to be held. This one used warmth and gravity and a silence that said, I will not push. My body unlearned bracing, the back muscles letting go one by one, like fists opening. I was an Omega who had spent a decade being better at discipline than instinct. Tonight, for once, I let instinct be what it was without turning it into a weapon. Why me? I asked the ceiling, because looking at him while I said it felt like stepping off a ledge. I could give you a speech about values, he said. About ending a machine I helped build, about recognizing an enemy who wasn't. All true. His jaw flexed, then eased. Or I could say that the first time you walked into my hangar, the room finally made a sound I wanted to listen to. The imprint rose at that, clean and undeniable. It didn't feel like chains. It felt like a compass finally pointing somewhere that wasn't a cliff. I hate you a little, I admitted. For making this harder. I know, he said. I hate me more. I turned in his coat until I could tuck my forehead under his chin. Tomorrow we might break everything. Then we'll build different, he said, as if it were possible, and worse, as if he believed it. We sat like that until the heater kicked off, until the cold crept in around our ankles and reminded us there was a world to return to. He pressed his mouth to my hair. I pressed my mouth to the knot in his throat where men keep their unsaid truths. When I finally stood, my legs remembered their job. He didn't reach to steady me. He didn't need to. Still your choice, he said again, softer now, as if the room had ears. I slipped the earpiece back into my pocket instead of my ear. It always will be. Outside, the floodlights made halos of our breath. The tower blinked its slow red. I lifted his coat from my shoulders. He shook his head and pushed it back into place. Keep it, he said. Bring it back after dawn. After dawn, I echoed, as if the words were a vow. I walked toward the infirmary with a body that had stopped rattling and a mind that had finally picked a side. My mission had a new clause now, written in the careful script of a woman who, for once, chose desire over duty, and found that the two might not be enemies after all. War waited for us in the morning. So did everything else we wanted to live long enough to name. Dawn cracked like a rifle shot. Engines roared awake. Boots pounded gravel. The sky stretched pale and brittle over the tree line as if it knew it would burn by noon. Radios barked orders in 2 languages, sometimes overlapping, sometimes contradicting each other. The offensive had begun. By rights, I shouldn't have been on the command platform beside Adrian Volk. Medics didn't belong here, spies even less so. But the flash drive under my jacket had given us the one weapon neither side expected: information, and Adrian wasn't about to waste it. He handed me a headset. His eyes found mine briefly, like a checkpoint passed without words. You know the coordinates? I nodded. We'd spent half the night turning real artillery targets into ghosts, decoy sites that would bleed the enemy's ammo into empty hillsides. Now I had to feed those ghosts to the right channels before someone noticed the trick. The map table flickered with live drone footage. Blue and red markers pulsed like heartbeats. The first shells hit far to the south, right where we wanted them, right where no one was. "Your move, Mason," Liam said over comms. He was 300 meters away with a laptop balanced on a crate, drones humming overhead like angry hornets. His voice carried the calm of someone who thought firefights were just badly organized video games. "Sending now," I said, fingers flying over the console. The false coordinates leapt across encrypted channels toward enemy interceptors. Liam whistled low. "Beautiful. They'll eat that up like free beer." Static crackled. Then enemy artillery swung east, slamming into another patch of forest we'd emptied hours ago. Trees splintered, dirt geysered. No soldiers died because there weren't any. "Real life," Liam said cheerfully. "Best quest ever. 10 out of 10 would hack again." "Focus," Adrian said, not looking up from the map. Liam laughed and muted himself before Adrian could invent new military crimes for him. Return fire came faster than expected. Mortars whined overhead, distant thuds edging closer. The command platform rattled like cheap tin. Someone shouted for medics. I ducked instinctively as another shell landed somewhere near the motor pool. Smoke smeared the horizon. "Stay on task," Adrian told me, as if we weren't one direct hit away from becoming modern art. Easy for him to say. He stood like artillery couldn't read maps. Reports flew in, enemy units confused, advancing on wrong coordinates, chasing ghosts through empty valleys. Our real positions held, for now. I passed updated data to Liam. His drones relayed false signals back to enemy scouts, a hall of mirrors stretching across half the front. Dr. Rains stormed past with 2 orderlies dragging a stretcher, voice sharp enough to cut steel. "If command's done playing chess, I have men bleeding out by the fuel dump." "Working on it," I muttered, rerouting another set of fake coordinates. "Work faster," he snapped, vanishing into smoke and curses. Charming man. Then the east flank collapsed. Not fully, not fatally. But one enemy unit ignored the ghosts, advancing straight toward a comms relay we actually needed. If they took it, our whole deception unraveled. "I'll handle it," I said before thinking. Adrian's head turned sharply. "Mason, I can reach the uplink on foot," I pressed. "Feed them new data manually. If we lose that tower, we lose everything." His jaw flexed like he wanted to order me underground instead. Mortars boomed closer. "Finally go. I'll cover you." The run burned. Gravel, mud, smoke-thick air tearing at my lungs. The relay tower loomed through haze. Metal ribs stark against a sky smeared with ash. Bullets snapped overhead like angry insects. I slammed into the control shed just as another shell hit somewhere too close, ears ringing, ribs rattling. The console flickered, half dead, but alive enough to shove our lies through one more time. Adrian's voice crackled in my headset. 2 minutes. "Working," I panted, fingers flying. "Make it 1..." Of course he'd say that. Enemy fire chewed the ground outside. Adrian's rifle answered from somewhere unseen, precise and patient. He wasn't spraying bullets, he was sculpting silence 1 shot at a time. I sent the last packet of false data just as the console finally died under shrapnel spray. Sparks kissed my sleeve. "Done," I shouted. "Move," Adrian barked. I bolted from the shed. He was there instantly, covering our retreat with the kind of focus that made running beside him feel safer than any bunker. By dusk, it was over. The enemy had spent their fury on empty hills and phantom convoys. Our real positions held. The offensive cracked, then crumbled, then limped back across the tree line with fewer men and even fewer illusions. We'd won. Not neatly, not without cost. Rains's medical tents overflowed. Stretchers lined the mud outside like grim punctuation. But the line held, and the war hadn't swallowed us whole. Liam found me near the comms truck, soot-streaked and grinning like he'd just beaten the final boss. "Told you," he said, peeling off his headset. "Best quest ever." I sank onto a crate, lungs aching, clothes stiff with smoke. Across the yard, Adrian spoke with field officers, posture straight despite exhaustion dragging at all of us. When his eyes found mine, the noise of generators and groaning engines faded for half a breath. We'd stopped a war today. Tomorrow would ask what it cost. The ceasefire line felt too quiet, like the earth itself was waiting to see if we meant it this time. 2 long tables stretched across the muddy yard between the command tents. Papers weighed down by field radios and half-empty mugs. Officers from both sides stood stiff and sleepless, eyes sharp enough to cut the air. Somewhere in the distance, an engine coughed and fell silent, the last echo of a war that hadn't quite ended yet. I stood at Adrian's side wearing his coat and my own pulse-like armor. The flash drive with every stolen plan sat heavy in my pocket. I hadn't given it back. Not yet. "Dr. Mason," someone announced, "before we begin." "I'm not a doctor," I said, and my voice carried further than I expected. "Not the kind you think, anyway." Heads turned. Soldiers shifted, hands brushing holsters. I drew a breath. "My name is Elis Mason. I was sent here as an intelligence operative for the Western Alliance." I laid the flash drive on the table between maps and treaties like a blade sheathed in plastic. "These are your plans. Every route, every strike, every fallback position. I stole them. I sent your enemies the ghosts that bled your offensive dry." Silence cracked across the yard. A few soldiers twitched toward their weapons. Adrian lifted a hand without looking away from me. Safeties clicked, holsters loosened, the yard stilled. "Stand down," he said, voice even. "No one fires." The officers froze. Adrian's gaze returned to me, steady as the ground we stood on. Finally he said, "I know." My throat tightened. "You... what?" "I knew the night you walked into my hangar with eyes that counted exits before faces," he said. "I knew when you handled maps like you meant to burn them. And you let me." "I wanted the choice to be yours," he said simply. "Not your orders, not mine. Yours." The world tilted a little, like someone had kicked one of its legs out. "You felt it too," I whispered. His gaze didn't waver. "From the first moment, a pause. But if I claimed you before you chose me, it wouldn't mean anything. Something in my chest that had been locked since the first briefing room door swung open and let in too much light." Adrian turned to the table then, voice hardening. "We're done feeding this machine," he said. "We start talking now." Negotiations began with ink instead of bullets for the first time in years. Representatives from both sides signed documents that read like new scripture. No more conscripting Omegas into military service. No more Alpha-only command structures. No more breeding programs disguised as defense initiatives. Alphas and Omegas would serve as equals now, or not serve at all. The war machine that had eaten both our countries for a decade wheezed its last breath onto paper and handed the future to people who wanted something better than ash. Adrian signed last. The pen looked too small in his hand, like he could have carved his name into the table instead. When he set it down, the yard exhaled all at once. Liam found me near the mess tent afterward, grinning like a man who intended to live forever. "Hell of a story, Mason," he said, wiping grease off his hands with a ration wrapper. "Spy falls for the general she's supposed to ruin, stops a war, changes the whole damn system. Yeah, I'm definitely writing this." I arched a brow. "A novel?" "Romance, obviously. The Spy and the General. Has a nice ring. Sounds like bad poetry," I muttered, but my mouth betrayed me with a smile. Liam smirked like he'd won something. "I'll put you on the cover wearing his coat." I shoved him lightly on my way past. "Go calibrate a drone before I ruin your epilogue." Evening found the camp quieter than I'd ever heard it. No shouted orders, no rumble of convoys, no distant thunder of artillery. Just wine through pine and the occasional clatter of dishes from the mess hall. Adrian waited by the edge of the tree line, away from the lights. He looked like a man who'd carried a war on his shoulders so long he hadn't realized it could be set down. "You could have had me arrested this morning," I said, stopping a few feet away. "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" His eyes found mine in the dim. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do after the last bullet fell, and now you have—" "Yes," he said softly. "Now I have—" The wind tugged at his coat where it still hung on my shoulders. I hadn't given it back. Maybe I never would. For the first time since I crossed the border with the pocket full of lies, there were no masks left to wear. No mission. No sides. No orders waiting to be obeyed. Just a man and a woman standing in the ruins of a world they hadn't wanted, and the beginning of one they might actually choose. Adrian stepped closer. Not a commander. Not even a soldier now. Just him. I met him halfway. The kiss tasted different without gunpowder in the air, without the clock ticking down to 0 behind us. Slower, warmer, like the first breath after surfacing. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "What now?" I whispered. "Now," he said, "we build something worth surviving for." And for once, the future didn't feel like a battlefield at all.